Cuba's foreign minister is in St. Lucia a day ahead of his meeting with CARICOM. A row over freedom of information shakes Trinidad and Tobago. We ask what is behind it. And a special commission to be created to address the migration issue on the southern border of Mexico. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. We begin in St. Lucia, where the Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez has met St. Lucia Prime Minister Alan Chastanet as he continues his tour of Caribbean nations. On Wednesday, Rodriguez and Chastanet reaffirmed their commitment to strengthening relations between their countries. In February of this year, St. Lucia marked 40 years of independence, and Cuba was among the first countries to establish diplomatic ties with the newly independent St. Lucia in 1979. St. Lucia has also recently signed cooperative agreements with Cuba in the areas of agriculture and education. On Friday, Rodriguez will preside over the Cuban delegation that will participate in the 6th CARICOM-Cuba ministerial meeting to be held in Guyana. The Cuban foreign minister's first stop on Tuesday was in Trinidad and Tobago, where he held talks with Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and his foreign minister Dennis Moses. All parties reaffirmed the good status of bilateral relations and historical bonds of friendship that unite both countries. Rodriguez will also visit Barbados. The tour of Caribbean countries will last until June 18th. Our correspondent Alison Kentish has the details.
Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parilla ended his two-day visit to St. Lucia on Thursday. It's part of his Caribbean tour, which included official visits to Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Barbados. Now in St. Lucia, he met with Prime Minister Alan Chastanet and Minister with Responsibility for Foreign Affairs, Honorable Sarah Flood-Bober. And according to the Office of St. Lucia's Prime Minister, the discussions focused on areas of mutual concern and benefit, including healthcare, agriculture, and of course, education. Both parties said the visit builds on the strong ties between St. Lucia and Cuba and reaffirms the commitment to work together. St. Lucia is celebrating a year-long 40th anniversary of independence, and Cuba was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with a newly independent St. Lucia in 1979. Alison Kentish, Telesur, St. Lucia.
That was Alison Kentish with that report in St. Lucia. Haitian President Jovenel Moise says he will not bow to demands of protesters and resigned amid allegations of embezzlement of funds linked to Petrocaribe oil initiative. The spokesperson for the head of state, Charlotte Jacqueline Jr., said that Moise had done everything to ensure that there was an investigation into the corruption scandal. That probe concluded that nearly $2 billion from the program was misused and that Moise's company received a cash advance nearly 2 months before a road contract was signed. Meanwhile, Haiti's government has condemned the attack on the French embassy during recent protests. There is no let-up in the protest by doctors and teachers in Honduras, but now some are proposing a wider movement to overthrow President Juan Orlando Hernandez and install a constituent assembly. Gilda Silvestrucci reports.
Protests are continuing on main streets across Honduras until President Juan Orlando Hernandez offers transparent and credible talks.
The talks must be open. The media, like yourselves, need to know clearly what's happening, with no secret deals stitched up in the middle of the night. We want transparency.
The government still hasn't responded to the protesters' demands, while violent repression by the police and the military has increased.
They pulled me by the hair and took my backpack. They tried to take my phone, but I wouldn't let them. Show me your face, I said. Why are you hitting me? They say they'll take me away.
The government had offered talks, but on its own conditions, which weren't accepted by the teachers and doctors. The economic losses caused by the protests and roadblocks have drawn angry reactions, even among those who previously supported the government. While the protests continue, various sectors of society are anxiously discussing how to overcome the current political crisis. Politicians, businessmen, and church leaders are all looking for solutions. Some are suggesting a transitional government and a national constituent assembly.
Rather than a constituent assembly now, what we need is a process of transition that can gradually put an end to the dictatorship, and then we can think about a constituent assembly.
For others, the only solution possible is one that comes from the demands of those most affected by a situation where 70% are living in poverty.
There is no more room for traditional politicians to carry on in the same old way. Things have to change once and for all. They have to listen to the people and understand that that is the only way out.
The latest round of protests began as a union struggle, but now there is talk of a wider alliance of social movements that can bring everyone together to get rid of President Hernandez and his government.
The Intercept has released the 5th segment of its report on collaboration between former federal judge and current Minister of Justice Sergio Moro and federal prosecutor Delton Dalagnol. In the latest set of conversations released, Dalagnol tells Moro that decisions on how to proceed require what translates literally to an articulation with the Americans. Dalagnol was the chief prosecutor for Operation Lava Jato, the sweeping anti-corruption probe that has swept up hundreds of Brazilian politicians. At the time, Moro was the judge who ruled on the cases. This included an alleged plot against former President Lula da Silva. Our correspondent in Brazil, Brian Mier, has more.
Last night, The Intercept released a new set of conversations between Lava Jato task force members Sergio Moro, who's now serving as far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's justice minister, and prosecutor Delton Dalagnol. Now, these new conversations released two pieces of important information which further advance the argument that the entire purpose of the operation was to prevent the PT party from winning the 2018 presidential elections. In these conversations, Dalagnol and Moro talk about how a Supreme Court minister named Luis Fux was working in collaboration with them. Moro even says, "In Fux we trust." Now, it's important to note that Fux both denied a habeas corpus for Lula last year, and he also issued an order barring Lula from speaking to the press during the election season. Now, this is very unusual because in Brazil, the press interviews mass murderers and organized crime heads inside of jail all the time. The other revelation is that they were also communicating with the Americans. Now, the fact that the Department of Justice has been a partner in Operation Lava Jato has been a matter of public record from day one. You can see on their own website them talking about it. But the problem is that in 1997, Brazil signed a treaty for mutual legal cooperation between Brazil and the United States, which has a clear set of guidelines, and it specifies that all communications between the two governments have to be centralized. It specifies that in Brazil, these communications have to be centralized through the Federal Ministry of Justice. So if informal communications were going on between Sergio Moro's Lava Jato task force and the U.S. Department of Justice, this is a crime in Brazil, which should result in immediately throwing out the conviction of Lula.
That was Brian Mier with that report. The Venezuelan government has been meeting United Nations representatives in the country to strengthen cooperation. The Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, said they had evaluated together the government's plan to help victims of the economic war and that she had invited UN agencies to support it. The plan aims to assist those most affected by the blockade imposed by the United States and its allies. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has already expressed support for the talks with the opposition that began in Norway.
We have had an important meeting with the UN agencies that are here in our country. As President Nicolás Maduro said, we have agreed to expand and deepen collaboration in all the areas we have been working in. And we have also asked for some aspects of the Plan of Patria to be included, which haven't been considered yet. So we are working to include them.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. Guyanese are no doubt anxiously awaiting the Caribbean Court of Justice's ruling on the country's no-confidence motion on June 18th. After some delay, the court has set the tentative date to deliver judgment on the matter, which could see the country returning to the polls. Following last December's passage of the no-confidence motion against the government, the coalition administration challenged the validity of the motion in the High Court. However, in January, the acting Chief Justice upheld the passage of the motion, ruling that it was validly passed with the 33 majority. This decision was then appealed by government. In March, the appeal court ruled that 34 votes were needed to pass the motion. The CCJ will finally determine on these matters. In Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced the creation of a special commission to address the migration issue on the southern border. This is in compliance with the agreement signed with the United States that demands Mexico reduce the number of people who seek to cross the border without documents.
The Mexican president recognized that to reduce the flow of migrants in less than 3 months is a great challenge. He also presented the members of the special commission that will handle this phenomenon on the southern border of Mexico.
It is by fulfilling the needs that cause people to leave their countries. This is not solved with the use of the force.
Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard will coordinate the work of Commission to fulfill the commitments included in the agreement signed with Washington.
This is not what the United States wanted. It was their main plan. This is a proposal that we put on the table, and we have time to demonstrate that it can work.
The implementation of the governmental strategy will include the deployment of up to 6,000 members of the National Guard, who will, among other things, be in charge of registering those who come in the country. López Obrador also ordered to speed up the application of social and employment programs in the southern states. Meanwhile, the U.S. president insists that he has negotiated an agreement with Mexico, which he has failed to disclose so far.
Here's the agreement. It's a very simple agreement. This is one page. This is one page of a very long and very good agreement for both Mexico and the United States.
Meanwhile, south of Mexico, uncertainty grows among those who flee poverty and violence in their countries, like Guatemala, El Salvador, and especially Honduras.
We want the United States and Mexican government to listen to us and give us the opportunity to pass, and I do not agree with the Army and Marines acting this way.
It is very dangerous because the migration police is roaming around, and if you leave your home, they will catch you and send you back to your country.
The Special Commission to address the immigration phenomenon will also work in the creation of a regional system that includes the governments of the countries that, just in the first 5 months of 2019, expelled between 350,000 and 400,000 people.
Workers at Chile's giant copper mining company Codelco are to go on strike this Friday. The miners voted to down tools at the Chuquicamata copper mine after rejecting the company's bonus offer. They want better wages and a decent health plan and a pension plan. Codelco is the world's biggest exporter of copper, but its business faces risks from the United States trade war on China. Dozens of Colombian refugees who have been displaced by the armed conflict are seeking assistance from international organizations in Ecuador, but they haven't found help, just neglect and sometimes police repression.
80 people, among them children, disabled and senior citizens who have fled the armed conflict in Colombia, are stationed outside the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in deplorable conditions. They say they won't leave until the organizations offer guarantees, among them security and safe passage to a third country.
We call on human rights defenders to help us. We are single mothers that are fleeing in order to save our children.
Many of them are refugees who receive threats from organized armed groups in Colombia, and the authorities have failed to protect them. In fact, they've used police to evict them by force.
How can this happen? I was in my house on Thursday, and the barging and burn everything to the ground.
The Colombian consul should have been here, but she shunned us and called us liars. She is aware of the conflict, and she should have known that our rights and our lives are in danger. She needs to be here.
We tried unsuccessfully to reach out to a representative of the High Commissioner. Meanwhile, Colombian refugees fear they will be criminalized.
We are aware that they are looking for ways to have us removed. They label us drug dealers and members of the guerrilla. We are constantly keeping watch to ensure that they don't play arms and drugs on us, to then say that we are criminals.
It's been more than 10 days since these Colombian citizens have camped outside the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Quito. They say they won't be moved until they have answers and, above all, protection for their families.
The association known as the Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo has revealed the identity of grandchild number 130, who disappeared during the last dictatorship in Argentina. Javier Matias recognized that he recovered his identity thanks to DNA tests through this association. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
It's a day to celebrate amidst the challenge currently experienced in Argentina. We are at the headquarters of the Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo organization, and as you can see, the room is packed. The grandmothers have released the identity of grandchild number 130, Matias Javier Millacuch de Rux, son of Elena and Javier Matias, who disappeared from Buenos Aires in December 1977. It's an emotional moment for Matias' relative, who have spent 40 years looking for him. Matias was willing to be a part of this conference led by the organization's president, Estela Carlotto. It's a moment to reflect and a time to call on the community to keep searching for more details about his parents. For 42 years, these women with white handkerchiefs have struggled for justice.
We have a special report from our correspondent in Colombia about the worsening situation in rural communities as residents are forced to leave due to violence.
Colombia's Ombudsman's office has issued an alert regarding the massive forced internal displacements throughout the country.
The Nariño department accounts for 43% of overall displacements, 3,540 people. This is evidence that forced displacements continues, and we are worried about the lack of guarantees to protect the rights of the population.
For Marco Romero, director of the Human Rights and Displacement Consultancy, CODES, the figure is only a small fraction, which shows how deep the armed conflict goes in Colombia.
People are facing expulsion from their territories, and others dare to speak about ethnic cleansing. There's an obvious strategic interest in those territories and historically a lack of protection.
The Colombian departments demonstrating the largest figures of forced displacements are the same ones which have seen murders of social leaders. For several people living in the rural territories, it shows a clear interest behind the humanitarian situation.
This is a geographical war. They want to complete large economic projects, but us, indigenous people, are settled in the areas that they are interested in. These areas, such as Chocó and the Pacific, have resources that they want to exploit. It's not just about drug trafficking routes. They want to clear those territories to start mega projects like that Atrato Truandó, Interoceanic Canal, Tribuga Gulf, and railways for the Pacific.
While many are being forced to leave, others are being confined, and the figures are growing. 12,773 people have been affected by this situation. All of them are part of ethnic groups and communities which are still waiting for the social investments which were promised by the government.
Trinidad and Tobago and Ghana are backing dialogue and diplomacy to ensure peace in Venezuela. This was made clear by Trinidad's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo as the West African leader continues his Caribbean tour.
As the international efforts are being made to bring about dialogue within the Venezuelan context, between Venezuelans, other countries of the world are trying to encourage them. And Ghana's role as a leading West African and African country, and on behalf of not just Ghana but the Caribbean and Venezuela, Ghana would do well to assist in ensuring that there are diplomatic initiatives maintained towards a peaceful solution and a speedy solution to the Venezuelan problem.
On the African side, whatever we can do also to assist those on this side to be able to have a positive resolution of the crisis in Venezuela, I think it is our moral duty to do so.
June has been declared the month of Afro-Peruvian culture. It's an opportunity to discover and promote one of Peru's most hidden treasures.
In the Street of the Holy Spirit. That's the title of this play about the lives of African slaves and their struggle for freedom.
They don't tell us about this at school. They don't say anything about Afro-Peruvians being such an active part of the history and growth of this country. So it's very important to talk about it, and even better if it is in such an educational form as the theater.
¿Qué más si es a través de una forma tan didáctica como es el teatro?
The Afro-Peruvian community has played a prominent part in art and music. Their traditions have gained more and more recognition, like this black music, where the percussion box is the key instrument.
We give it a bit of a push, add harmony, make it full of joy, which we need to reach more people. We are talking all of a tradition that came from Africa. But the percussion box is ours. It's pure Peruvian.
For black activists, declaring June the month of Afro-Peruvian culture is an opportunity to promote the community's identity even more. But they say this is still not enough, because they say black Peruvians still face serious discrimination. For example, at university, where only 10% manage to get a degree.
Only 1 in 10 finishes university, only 1. And that one will have a really hard time finding a job. Because even if you have the same qualities and the same qualification as anyone else, but then it comes to the interview, they look at your skin color, and that's what decides who gets the job.
According to the census in 2017, 3.6% of the Peruvian population is black. And they are one of the most vulnerable sectors. 1/3 earn less than the minimum wage and live in poverty.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. UK Home Secretary Sajid Javid has signed a request for journalist and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to be extradited to the US, where he faces an 18-count indictment, which includes charges under the Espionage Act. Our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, has more.
Today, Thursday, the British Minister of the Interior, or Home Secretary as he's called here, Sajid Javid, has announced on the BBC radio show, the Today programme, that he had signed what he called was an extradition order by the US government of Donald Trump to have the WikiLeaks founder and journalist Julian Assange extradited to the US to face 18 charges, including espionage, some that fall under the Espionage Act. Now, speaking to the Today programme this morning, local time, he said that he's rightly behind bars, referring to Assange. There's an extradition request from the US that is before the courts tomorrow, but yesterday I signed the extradition order and certified it, and that will be going in front of the courts tomorrow. Now, Javid made an error, in fact, by saying it was an order. It was a request as per British extradition process, and that will be seen tomorrow at the Westminster Magistrates. Now, it would be expected that Julian Assange would come in via video link, although at the previous Westminster Magistrates hearing to look at the extradition request, he was too ill to take part. Now, his father has been in London this week, and I spoke to him earlier this week, and he just before he went to Belmarsh to visit his son for the first time. Now, there have been grave concerns over Assange's health, his deteriorating health, and there's still speculation as to whether he will be in fact able to even attend this time via video link, although there is talk of the hearing being moved to Belmarsh Prison if that is the case. Now, as we know, Julian Assange has been in Belmarsh Prison in the south of London since mid-April, when he was expelled from the Ecuadorian embassy in London by the Lenin Moreno government after they revoked the political asylum status that he had been given under the Rafael Correa government.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.